Hi everyone, and welcome to Career Propeller. My name is Jonathan, and today we're joined by Ben Ward from Bemillion. Morning.
Hi, Rob.
How are you doing?
Yes, I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time, Ben. Really appreciate it. Perhaps we could start off with just sort of asking you about Bemillion and your role there and how that sort of all came about.
Yeah, of course. So, Bemillion is a recruitment agency of sorts. We're actually titled ourselves as a recruitment solutions provider. So we work with businesses specifically to just empower their recruitment division. So whether that's the solutions right for them to outsource the recruitment division to us, or whether it's contingency-based recruitment is the thing that makes the most sense for them. Fixed-term contracts, whatever it is that we need to do to make their sort of recruitment division and recruitment procedures as strong and robust as possible.
Okay.
So we started Bemillion just over a year ago now. So we're pretty early business, but we do work. We sort of come into the market quite strong with existing clients from previous work that I'd been involved in, where I think I'd sort of found that the solutions needed, I wasn't able to sort of offer and provide them in existing structures that I existed in. So about a year ago, we decided it was the right time to do something where we could offer a bit more flexibility to our clients.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. And what are the main markets that you're in?
Predominantly construction and IT. The reasons being, construction's always been my background. I've worked on site since I was sort of 13, 14 years old,
Okay.
with family predominantly. And then we also partner, we have a sister company called Bemillion, which one of our main investors also owns an IT solutions provider. So it made sense for us to cross over into that market as well. That was sort of part of his inspiration for wanting to get into the recruitment world, was the opportunity he saw in IT. And obviously I brought a wealth of sort of knowledge and expertise on the construction side.
Yeah. Okay, it's interesting. And so you mentioned you were previously at other recruitment firms. When did you start in recruitment? So you also mentioned you sort of been on site, on construction sites from a young age. How did that sort of work in terms of making that transition?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting because I didn't know. I remember working on site. My dad had a firm and my uncle had a firm, so I sort of swapped between the two in my summer holidays.
Yeah.
But it was never anything. It wasn't a choice. It was just something that we went. We were sort of told that we go and do at the weekend or the week.
Yeah.
So I didn't really know much about what was going on and why it was going on. But I remember the young lads in the suits used to come on with the biscuits. And I remember very vividly the perceptions around recruiters and recruitment consultants in what would have been sort of mid-noughties, sort of 2004, 5, 6.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the perceptions were always quite varied, shall we say? So I remember that from very early. But then my life sort of went down the sports route, academic route. So I went to university to study sports coaching. And sort of a people management perspective. Actually ended up getting into the nightclub scene, and it wasn't until 2013 or 14 that I came out of that and started at a big blue chip organisation on their training scheme. So that was probably about 6 years ago now that I got into recruitment.
Okay, yeah, and that's I was talking to someone recently who had sort of taken that route as well, and it's a really good grounding working for a big recruitment firm, I think, because you obviously get the good training to start with. You also get the backing of a big brand, good sort of advertising and marketing spend, but that they've been there and done it. And I think it's running a volume business as well is quite challenging, I think, particularly in these sort of times.
Sorry, what was really interesting for me is I used to see a lot of people sort of go and come back. And it was always this big fear factor of, no one can do it without the systems we've got. And having started inside that and having all these fancy buttons to press, you really don't know what you're going to be missing out on. So it's almost like your whole job changes when you leave the blue chip, but at least you know how it's supposed to look. So you have a lot of holes to fill and a lot of problems to figure out when you leave.
Yes.
But certainly it's better than not knowing what the best practice looks like.
Absolutely. And so did you go straight from a big firm into starting Bemillion, or was there a smaller firm in between?
Yeah, so there was actually, I think I spent about 2 years at a big firm, and in that time was sort of one of the quickest people to make my way through the training program and into sort of people management in the office, looking after the construction team. And I think probably just being young, hungry, and motivated, you always think that you're doing more than you are, and probably worth more than you are. And it just led me down a long route of conversations. And as it happened, there was a smaller firm, a private firm in the same city, that were looking for a new area manager. So I think I was probably 25, 26, and it just felt like a bit of a dream role.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
left it. It was a completely blue collar only business, very high volume. So in terms of what they were doing was actually a lot of a bigger operation than the big company I was working at in terms of what
yeah,
I actually had to look after. So that was an interesting transition. But again, it was constantly, we had more flexibility with our terms there. And I was always quite interested in getting in front of the directors and figuring out how I could squeeze out other agencies, you know, what pain points have they got, what needs fixing for productivity in their business. And again, I was finding that that was restricted. We were always coming to barriers where, despite what I thought was my seniority and what I thought was my aptitude for good business solutions, we weren't being listened to, and we were losing business for it. So actually, after a couple of years of trying to make that work, I started a company called The Built World, with me and a friend who was actually a photographer.
okay,
Um, and the whole idea, but before it, I didn't really have a big budget to start a business. I didn't have a big budget for job boards or advertising spaces or anything like that. So we just sort of went about, I would recruit and place people for contingency, and he'd do all the marketing, which we'd put all online. So we used to just go walking around London, taking pictures of construction sites and creating our job adverts and stuff like that. And networking along the way, tagging people in it, just constantly asking people if they knew anyone.
yeah,
Before you knew it, I think we'd done about £100,000 turnover in our first year for The Built World,
wow,
just through placements. And it was from we didn't have an office, which had a computer, phone, and he had a camera. We had a social media site. So
wow,
The Built World was sort of the first early evolution of it. But we made a lot of mistakes, particularly from a business perspective. I could definitely consult, and I could definitely sell. He could definitely market, and we definitely had a good media presence, and we were fooling people into thinking we were a big business, and we were getting meetings with the biggest construction consultancies, with articles published in the chartered journals like the ICES and stuff like that, which done really
yeah,
well for us in certain markets. So we were being taken seriously, but the sort of mess we left behind. It wasn't until I met my business partner at Bemillion, now who's the owner of Bemillion, that those things really started to click into place. So we sort of drew a line under what we were doing at The Built World, and just brought everything over to Bemillion. Within the first year of Bemillion, which is technically the first 2 years of since The Built World, or 2 or 3 years, we're now a team of 5, with an office. Sort of finally doing everything properly, with a lot of success with clients where we have sort of 5 or 6 that we actually have yearly agreements with, and they outsource their recruitment candidate attraction strategies, we call them,
yeah,
and business lead attraction strategies as well, because we actually developed the model where we duplicated the successes that we were having with attracting candidates, and now we're looking at, actually, can we attract the clients on the premise that we're trying to attract a specific person with a specific role. So we've just tupied that over, and that's really successful for us as well.
yeah. There is a lot there for
Yeah,
people. I think for people watching, there's so
yeah,
many lessons there. I think. I mean, first of all, as you say, you sort of started with nothing, basically, with Built World,
mm,
and it just shows that with persistence and consistency, knocking on doors, which is literally you were sort of going around knocking on doors. What
yeah,
would you? I mean, how did you sort of engage with people? Were you sort of going to the construction sites and then saying, how can I speak to the person in charge, or what was your sort of method of? Because it was
yeah.
obviously very successful.
Yeah, I think I was lucky. My bad luck and my good luck sort of went hand in hand. So what I thought was bad luck while I was in businesses for the 3 years previous, where I was going to meet with directors about the pain points that my companies were creating in their businesses, where they
Yeah,
were getting shouted at for their clients because we were letting them down, or we were one of many agencies all trying to charge a lot of money and delivering a poor service. And because I couldn't actually, all of those conversations come to a halt in my previous organizations. So when I went and had the flexibility, I didn't realize the response I'd get from directors who knew I had their best interests at heart. So I was invited in quite quickly, luckily I had a business in Brighton, which was a civil engineering firm turning over £100 million. They asked me to come in. So my first early months of the built world was actually, I seconded myself to them to set up a recruitment division.
Okay.
There was a lot of money being spent with agencies at the time. And I think within a week of setting up the division, it was already saving them £3,000 every week on what they were previously spending. So we also had off the back of that, within 3 months, some good, a good success story and some helpful recommendations as well. And some of those guys went on to other civil engineering companies, other construction companies. And we've just always done everyone favors. I think, that's been a real big part of what we've done. We've always done the right thing, even when we couldn't get commercial sign off. And all of those things have all come, maybe not all of them, certainly, but pretty much all of the good work that we're working on right now and all the secure work has all come from things that we never got paid for once upon a time.
Yeah. Okay. And so, I think, as you say, some sort of goodwill that goes out into the world always, not always, but very often does come back, and it might not be straight away. But I mean, I might have spoken to someone 6, 7, 8 months ago, and they come back and say, look, I know we spoke and there was nothing at that time, but there's a piece of work now that I think you might be right for. And I think if you, as you say, if you show willing and you show that you're not, just out for a quick fee, for example, people do respond to that, because I guess some people are just out to make a fee, and that's understandable. If you're a huge business and you just need to make the numbers, then perhaps your motivations are slightly different. But starting out from scratch and then taking your built well business into Bemillion, I guess you sort of learned, as you say, you learned a lot along the way, and kept the good stuff and didn't do so much of the stuff that you thought wasn't working. But it's a really interesting journey, and I think it's the fact that you do other things apart from just the placements. I think that's very interesting. But I guess you had seen that from your time in construction itself, and you mentioned you were in the nightclub industry. Were there any sort of learnings from that? Any things you saw there that you've sort of taken with you?
It was hard work. It was constant work. So I think that's definitely a lot of characteristics that I've taken over. I'm sort of, I've always committed to living my job because it's the thing that pays me to live. So I think that was what you had to be very much with the nightclub promotions as well. It was almost 24/7. At 10 o'clock in the morning, we were in meetings with commercial meetings and marketing meetings, and then up at 4 in the morning, we were seeing people out the club. So it was just a very constant and having to wear a lot of hats in that game. I think probably one of the biggest things I've learned from is when I said being on site and remembering those perceptions. Every time I speak to a construction director, and equally every time I've ever spoken to a ground worker, a carpenter, a labourer, I am very aware that there's a conversation about me and my business that follows that on site. And I'm very aware of where their biases will go. So they automatically, if you introduce yourself as a recruitment agency, they automatically think you're trying to steal their wages. So sometimes to go above and beyond to prove to them that actually we're consultants and we're here to do the right thing, we get paid when it makes sense for people to pay us. So we do a lot of high value work that we don't, we'll introduce someone to a company. They'll say we're not on their PSL. We'll say, that's fine. Here's his name. We think he's the right fit anyway. Next time when the PSL's up for renewal, we might get a shot, we might not, but we've certainly got a good contact in a good industry for life where we're committed to establishing ourselves. We're not here just to steal from the industry. We're here to make it stronger, and we want to be paid, of course, for bringing that extra value to the industry, of course.
Yeah, and the word, the phrase recruitment consultant, I think lots of people are sort of call themselves that, or are called that. It's a job title that's very sort of typical in the industry.
Yeah.
But to be a true consultant, it's more than just contingent placements and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. To be a true consultant, obviously, as you say, you're trying to understand their pain points, what they're trying to achieve with the business, what do their resourcing needs look like, and how can you work with them. And I guess that leads into the other part of your business, which is the candidate attraction strategy.
Yeah.
But you go further than that, don't you? You actually create campaigns and resources and content and stuff like that. Can you tell us a bit about how that works?
So one of the things that we identified with companies who rely heavily on contingency recruitment and have the mentality where they don't necessarily respect their recruiters, they'll give it out to 100 companies. Whoever comes in first, whoever comes in whenever, they're just happy to take. They're just happy to take that. So those companies, we kind of find that they're not. Their brand actually gets dragged through the mud without them even knowing it with it from candidates, because you've got all of these consultants who aren't consultants, they're salespeople, and all respect to every one of them, because sometimes, a lot of the time, it's actually the business that creates that pressure to sort of only move forward to money and never do your free aftercare and things like that. So a lot of people don't get feedback. A lot of people find out their CVs have gone in late, and I think very quickly companies' brands can get damaged from having a lot of people throwing their name around the market. So one of the key concepts that that all of this was born from was actually attracting candidates directly to our client's brand. So we sort of leave our ego at the door, and it's not about attracting people to Bemillion. Bemillion's going to attract it straight to your brand, and make sure that they get a good candidate service no matter what. So we'll create the campaigns which are fully branded. We'll let all of your clients and your candidates know that you're a growing business that's excelling in the market. Every candidate that comes in will always be thanked and respected for reaching out to the business, regardless of how far of a non-match it is. And they'll always get feedback within a certain time. Now, sometimes managing that process for us means that we agree with the directors that if we don't get feedback from them with a certain time, then we're going to have to put the rejection in, because a rejection is better than nothing. But just having control of that process for us, alongside the directors, obviously they set the KPIs, they set the targets and the expectations. We just sort of act as them with the best practice that we learn and apply. And we find that it's without a doubt a lot cheaper for anyone who recruits any half regularly in a year. It's a lot cheaper for them to sort of outsource the service and have a lot more control of it. It just takes a little bit more attention sometimes from the companies, but that's certainly where those concepts were born from. And then we took that on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to be very open with our practices, because like I say, we're consultants first of all. We only get paid when people choose for us to execute it. But LinkedIn, I think, has been an amazing platform since we started the built world. I've always written articles on there. My articles have been about and noticed by the likes of Bovis Homes, Roll Along, and the modular construction. I've done a modular construction one which got picked up, and I've done one about surveying, which it got me inside all of the surveying companies that anyone could name. I probably met with the directors on the back end, putting this out on LinkedIn for free. So as we got more into LinkedIn, we started to figure out that, hey, this is actually showing us who's seeing the content. So I could see that all of my content was being seen by land surveyors. So I was very quickly recruiting for land surveyors and for land surveying companies, because I had their attention in front of me from the articles I'd written. And we just took that, that very same concept. So we will, and to be very open, we'll sit down with one of our clients. We'll identify their competitors. We'll identify their skill sets, their last projects, their upcoming projects. We want to know everything about the skill sets that make it work, and not just if they think they have them, but where do they think they exist. We then go and find out about. We make those networks our network. So we have consultants who dedicate their time to, time per day, time per week, to just talking to those networks and understanding why are these people working for their competitors. What projects are they working on for the competitors? That's always a good insight for people to have. What salary expectations have they got around their competitors or around the progression, and all of these different pain points around the recruitment market that we feed back to our clients. But like I said, the beauty of it is we get to pick the job titles that see it, the locations that see it, and that extends straight, not just from the candidate side, but to the client side as well.
Yeah.
So it's almost like that's a bit of a free. I'm sure a lot of people know about this, but for anyone who doesn't, a nugget. But really, the power of what we do then, because that's just thanks to LinkedIn, they've just set up those buttons for us. Great. So the power of what we do is really understanding our client's place in the market, what the message is that needs to be heard by decision makers, and how we tell that. So it's all then we've kind of set up the process which can be replicated, and we invest very heavily in our content creation team and our consultation teams who understand and create what needs to be put out for our clients and our candidates.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, going back at the beginning of what you said, there was the fact about reputation to start with, but reputational damage from using loads of different recruitment firms who are all fighting over the same jobs. And, let's face it, it's whilst, there are some brilliant recruiters out there, and I've worked with lots of brilliant recruiters, there are unfortunately some that they're chasing a fee, and they'll do pretty much anything to beat the competition. And it whilst that might get you a candidate quickly, it's the fallout, as you're saying, of what about the people who didn't get their CV sent through or didn't get selected, or, are they getting a good service? And you're absolutely right, it does reflect on the brand of that company, maybe even less on the recruitment firm itself, but actually on the brand of the company that you're doing the recruitment for. And I think companies, in my experience, don't really see that. It's a sort of because they're not day to day, they're just receiving CVs, and of course then they're doing the interviews and they're hiring that, but they don't see that the other side of it. I guess there's platforms like Glassdoor and things like that you can get some sort of insight into that, but actually that's more about people who've worked for your company rather than people who've interviewed. But again, that's why I sort of set up Career Propeller, because I've felt for a long time that companies don't actually tell their real story. And that's what you're saying, is that you need to work out who you're trying to attract, what they need to hear, and then creating that content. And that's the other thing I really love about what you said is, LinkedIn is a free platform, and you've got access to all of these people, your key sort of clients, your ideal clients. And if you sort of sit down and think, what is it that they need to hear? How can I sort of appeal to them and get them interested? Then you've got this platform where you can create content and draw people in. I'm sure lots of people do know that, but it's interesting to hear from someone like yourself who is you're doing it day in, day out, and it's working. It's really powerful. And I think perhaps companies haven't really sort of caught up with that, the fact that content marketing is massive now. And mostly it's free if you've got the time, or you've got someone who can create that sort of stuff for you. That sort of brings us nicely on to construction as a career, because we wanted to sort of talk a little bit about that. Now, I know there are hundreds of different sort of jobs, if not more, in that sector, but is there a typical career path that someone might take?
I think, in my opinion, that is ever changing, and I almost feel guilty putting out any advice on that, because in my memory, it goes as far back as when I was a young teenager. And like I said, I had family members in construction, and some of them had their own firms, and it was always about what a different trade was earning. The electricians are earning this, you need to go and train to do that. Oh, the bricklayers are earning this, you need to train to do that. And ever since then, and since being involved in it, I see job titles do this. And I can promise you that if you look at a job pay now, and it's high because bricklayers are getting £20 an hour, and that feels like a great rate, without even considering the weather that stops them working for some of the days a week, and the nature of being self-employed, and they don't get to pick that up 365 days of the year. I think like just with that alone, like if someone was going to train to be a bricklayer from today, the rates probably aren't going to be the same, and by the time that you come out of it. So I think one thing that I would say, that if anyone is seriously interested in a career in construction, try and focus on where construction comes from. And I think the reason I say that is because recently we've seen a lot of different reports around the construction industry and employment in construction industry. And I think I think it was probably as soon as about 3 days ago that I read, actually said that there's been one of the biggest ever declines in the number of jobs in construction at the moment. But with the COVID case, with everything that's happened with the pandemic and around COVID, as far as I can see, construction has been one of the only safe industries. And I know that that's probably going to be a big point of contention, because I know that self-employed people have been very poorly treated through it. And I think certainly the clarity and the safety for construction people was not good enough through the first pandemic. But since the government have reassessed their position on this, they've been very clear in committing huge amounts of money to infrastructure projects like the highways and rail, and even the Thames Tunnel and some of those projects as well. So I think we haven't seen a lot of that across a lot of sectors, but construction seems to be the answer out of economical problems in this country, or out of any problems in this country. We build our way out of it, and we invest in construction. Personally, if I was going to advise, if I was going to advise the young people, I'd be saying, looking at the academic route, look at the engineering route. I think that's the way that construction's going. Technology is taking over construction. Engineers are king, I think. And again, I might be crucified for this one, but I remember carpenters being the site managers on site. Now it seems to be the engineers that they're site managers on site. And I think that's a lot for the way the answers that are being asked to the site manager and the way that they're looking at construction projects nowadays. So certainly don't look at getting into construction thinking that you're going to be stood out in the cold every single day. Sometimes that's true, and most of the time that's worth it. But I think really look from a technical point of view, and what does construction mean to the country, and what is a construction project.
Okay, that's really good advice. I guess one of the things that's coming out of this current situation that we're in is the sort of build back better slogan that we've heard, and that's about sort of sustainability, isn't it? And building construction in a more sustainable way. Trying to reduce emissions, and as you've mentioned, technology. Where can technology help? So, I mean, how do you see things changing in that industry over the next sort of, say, 5 years? I know it's probably going to be rapid change, but what are you sort of picking up on?
I think one thing that we've definitely already seen is that construction's already happened before the first brick goes in nowadays. The planning stages are so meticulous, and I know this isn't on every project. It's not, you don't get a wall put up in your garden and that's probably still a bit more old school. But with the introduction of things like BIM, and some of the more technical, like the Bentley products and things like that, are the way people are designing the projects, right down to what used to be there and how it will come down and how it will be maintained. I think those are the biggest change in it, is very much. And when I said it's engineering and technology, I definitely think that pre-construction, and if anyone's going to get into construction, I'd advise, again, get into pre-construction. And I think looking at an extreme side of that, modular construction and modular build, goes to show that everything's already done before it even leaves the warehouse. It's built in a factory in settings where you're not risk getting rained off and stuff like that, so there's no delays, and it's a great concept. But it does mean that the engineering and the design and the consultancy around that has to be absolutely meticulously spot on. So I think that's for me. I think, I know it's not new. I know that there've been big companies, Arup and ACOMs, they've been consulting in largest construction projects with meticulous years and years of planning before. So it's not new. I just think a lot more projects all the way down the line are going to become more pre-planning focused.
Okay, that's interesting. And so for people who were thinking about a career in construction, would you suggest sort of more the academic route? So I guess it depends what you want to do in the industry, but would you suggest that people get certain sort of skills and qualifications before that, or are there sort of schemes that people can, when they can join as a school leaver, for example, and learn on the job, apprenticeships and that sort of thing? What's your sort of recommendation there?
My honest opinion on this, and it's probably not a best practice opinion, but I think if someone's really passionate about construction, they'll find their way to get to be valuable to construction. And
Yeah.
I think that's my advice to anyone. It's not, I wouldn't ever say, oh, if you want to get into recruitment, watch some James Caan interviews, but go and try recruitment. And equally go and try construction, have a look at it, speak to people in it, find out if you like the culture, what it contributes to society, the concept of doing that day to day. And I think if you really love that, like I've seen labourers go up to storeman and assistant site managers through finishing managers, site manager, and these guys will go on to own their own firms or maintenance companies one day. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. And I think, I'm sure I'm supposed to sit here and say, go and get a qualification, and then the company, like if we look now and through the pandemic, the companies that are recruiting the most, a lot of them are the big companies that do want academic qualifications. And within that, to back up what I said before, a lot of those are, there's a lot of grad placements, there's a lot of like digital positions and tech and innovation positions and stuff like that. So from that perspective, and if that side you want to get in, yeah, you've got to go and prove an engineering and maths competencies for an educational route. But if construction's your passion, go and start building, get on site, get close to the people who are making things happen. And go and make it happen for yourself. I think it's one of those industries where if you're willing to commit yourself to the project and the businesses will commit to you.
Yeah. And is it a case of people sort of maybe not turning up at a construction site, but I guess finding out the sort of companies they might want to work for, and then maybe doing a bit of networking or contacting people on LinkedIn. I know you can obviously search their careers section, but I guess in that construction sector, is there a way of not shortcutting, but making yourself a bit more known? And
I think for any candidate, any person looking for work, I'd definitely say get online yourself, make the approaches yourself. This is probably not what I should say, but companies don't like paying recruitment agencies. They pay recruitment agencies because they don't have the time or the resource, or they don't have the network, whatever it is. Not always a last option, but of course you'd rather have a candidate turn up on your doorstep for free. So if you think you're genuinely right and you genuinely think bring value to a business, go and tell someone. It's a bit different to, I'm not advising all of your watchers and listeners to just blanket email every construction company and say, I'm looking for a job, please find my CV enclosed. I think that does nothing for anyone except waste their time and bring me into business. So, but I think if you know that you want to work for a construction company and you know why you want to work for that construction company, 100% go and tell them.
Okay, no, that's good advice. That is really good. And again, that sort of brings us on to the current situation, and we know there have been. Well, I'm talking to lots of people who unfortunately have been made redundant recently. Furlough scheme has been extended, but I think they didn't do that in a great way because it was meant to be a hard finish at the end of October. And then when the new lockdown came in, they said, "Oh, we're going to extend it." So I think people had already been made redundant, and companies, had to sort of either think, "Do we want to rehire people?" Or so it hasn't been handled in a great way, I don't think.
Yeah.
But I guess it's not like a normal slowdown. In 2008, 2009, we had the credit crunch, and then there was a natural sort of fall off in the economies, and so I guess job losses followed that. But this is unprecedented. I mean, it was just literally March shut down, and that's it. Yeah. Although, as you say, construction sites were still allowed to carry on working to some extent, and obviously, as you say, the health and safety got better, and then people sort of understood a bit more. But I guess, what would your advice be if someone is finding themselves in the position where they're being made redundant, either in recruitment, construction, or any sort of market? What would be your key advice? Because I think it's fatal to sort of sit back and think, oh, what should I do? I think you need to take action straight away. Otherwise, you can find that because it does take a while, to find something else, especially if you have to maybe go slightly differently in terms of the market you're in, or the industry you're in, if your industry is very sort of depressed at the moment. So what would be your advice to someone who's sort of in that situation, that, you know, they're either facing redundancy or they have been made redundant?
It's really difficult, and I think it depends on what they're being made redundant from. You know, I think I really feel for people who, like, I know people who were in PR and events, and things like that, were really like corporate marketing and things like that. Like they really embodied those people, and that was what they loved doing and what they did. And that's come to a real halt with no real indication to how we can get those people back to bringing value to businesses, to corporations, to society, with those skill sets that they enjoyed applying so much. So, you know, my advice to them, I actually, you know, I wouldn't have any. I can't think about how difficult it'd be if tomorrow morning I had to jump in an Amazon delivery van and completely change what I love doing because no one wanted to buy what I had in the current climate. That's a real difficult one. But hopefully, you know, I know some people, and personally know some people, who this has given a real opportunity to assess, were they doing what they love doing, and is this a good chance to go and find what they love doing? So, you know, I know people who have started, while they're sat at home, they've started Etsy shops, you know, making things on, you know, little products for Christmas on Etsy and things like that. And they're actually much happier now. So it's a really difficult one, and I think it depends on what you've been made redundant from. But if you believe that your industry still exists, and you believe that there's still a purpose for you, and because people are still spending money in your space and your company just hasn't, or, you know, one really good example I've got is land and utility surveyors. So you tend to have a few different types of companies, and some of them will predominantly focus on coming to survey your garden if you want a new fence putting up or you want an extension done. And some of them will work on the large, you know, HS2 and like the airports and the Highways England contracts and stuff like that. Yeah. So during the pandemic, the Highways England guys and all the sort of key infrastructure works, they more or less carried on. But all of the companies that were doing houses, it was, you know, don't come near my house. So all of those guys shut down. So what we had was some land and utility surveying companies who also had people isolating and didn't have the staff, and then loads of staff that were either being made redundant or sat at home and just didn't know what was going on. So then it was a case of, okay, we need to get these people in touch with these people really quickly. So going back to my point, if like utilities, like infrastructure, if there's still a purpose for you and there's still money, and you've just been let down by either your subsector or your company, then get online very quickly, find out what companies are using your skill set right now and being paid for it, and go and ask to be paid for it. That's my advice to those people.
No, that's really good. I think, and take action. I think it can become you know, sort of the rot sets in if you sit back, which is sort of understandable. I think, you know, it's a horrible experience to go through, but I think you certainly feel better if you feel that you're taking action anyway, and that just sort of builds. In terms of CVs, I've never sort of recruited in the construction sector. I'm guessing they're not too different, but if you said to me, you know, what's the ideal CV for a management consultant, I'd say, well, it's 2 pages, and, you know, it's about achievements and all that sort of thing. For a construction CV, are there any sort of key hints and tips, or any structure that would stand out to you more than another one?
Yeah, I think with construction, the decision makers in construction are very focused on their types of projects, the values of the types of projects that they take on as a business. And that's usually, you know, a site engineer will win or lose a job based on whether or not he's worked on a similar job, not whether he's done that skill set that's needed on the job, but has he done it on the similar job? Yep. So it always surprises me how many people in construction, particularly project and contracts manager, because I feel like this stuff should be important to them anyway, but how many people don't list you know, the size of the project, the size of the teams, the numbers that surrounded their job, because that's what your employer, you know, as a project manager and contracts manager particularly, that's what, surely you know that's what your bosses are looking for. So project types and project values, and, you know, what did you do? What was your actual thing? Not just manage the site, but what roles? We all know that there are different roles involved with management of a business, and different businesses allocate those to different job titles. So it's good to understand people's understanding of what they do and don't do. So I think that's a really key one for construction ones. It's what have you worked on and what did you do there?
Yeah, that's good. And that probably does echo more general advice about CVs as well. I think, as I've spoken to a few people, as I say, recently, who have been they're in the position of being made redundant, and looking at the CV, you can tell that it just there's nothing sort of grabs you. And I guess
Yeah.
as a recruiter, you get quite used to, particularly if you're in volume recruitment, you get used to scanning a CV very, very quickly. And you sort of get into a pattern, don't you, of looking at, you look at certain areas. You might look at education. You obviously look at work experience. You might look at location, and interests sometimes. But generally, it's those sort of key things. But mainly, it's what has this person done. And if the language is more, the team did this or the team did that, it's, as you say, it's got to be about you, what your role was, and what you achieved, and also putting numbers on it. So if you're a salesperson, it's okay, so your role was to sell IT equipment, but what did you actually do? That's what's going to stand out. And I think candidates perhaps don't, and it sounds quite brutal, really, but especially when you talk about talent ATSs, sorry, applicant tracking systems and things like that. So where your CV goes in, and actually it might not even get in front of a human being until it's been through an element of being sifted out based on keywords, things like that. And it sounds sort of quite mechanical and industrial, but in a way it is, because I guess some companies get, well, I mean, Google gets like 2 or 3 million CVs a year, I think, or something like that. So and I'm sure big companies get thousands and thousands and thousands of CVs. So they have to have some way of sifting out. But as a recruiter, as a candidate, I think you don't appreciate the short bit of time that a recruiter actually has to look at your CV. So it has to grab them immediately. So putting those key achievements in, and if you looked at a CV of, as I say, if you say talking about a project manager and they've managed a flagship site, and it's come in on budget and it's come in on time and all that, that's the sort of thing you think, well, okay, this person clearly knows what they're doing. I'm going to take a further look. And I think as a recruiter, when I was in recruitment, you give it that sort of 20-30 second initial overview, and then something will stand out, and then you'll think, okay, I'm going to go back, and then I'm going to spend a couple of minutes probably looking at it properly. But the reality is, when you're working at a high volume, if it doesn't stand out to you, it will go to the side. And that does sound quite cold and brutal, but it's just the reality of it, I think. So it's good for candidates to know that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you said there, sorry, was if you are an IT sales consultant, and I think that's a really key point. It's having worked at sort of big companies and around multi-specialist consultants and people who specialize in other things, there was never a one-size-fits-all for just a candidate. You have your best practice training, but different job titles and the people hiring those different job titles look for different nuances and different differences within the skill set. So I think for candidates, it's important as well to understand what do people actually look for in my market? What does my boss look for? Is it the common thing that I don't know, they need to be close to the office? Is it a lot of office time, or do we work remote, or is it salary bands that seem to be the sticking point? And I think understanding the hiring problems and wants in your own market is key to designing your own CV, because then you get to understand what's important. And IT sales guys should know that it's going to be very revolving around the numbers of what they've sold in IT. And likewise, every job title is going to have their own different thing.
Yes. Okay. And if we look at that from a point of view of a company, because obviously, as you said, you create campaigns for companies. If there's a company out there, well, I mean, obviously, the main advice would be for them to come and talk to you, because you can help them, to formulate their strategy and their campaign. But if they're there thinking, well, we need to hire some people, but our hiring hasn't been spot on before. We've hired a few people we probably shouldn't have hired, and we're not really cutting through to the candidates we really want to get to. What's the advice there? Would you say for them to sort of go back to the beginning and think about who you're actually trying to hire, and then how you're going to get to them, or is there a process that they could go through?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, in terms of just giving an overview of what that process would look like, I'd honestly say open up an Excel spreadsheet and start mapping anyone who you think has the skill set that you need. And then once you've got 50 of them, 100 of them, or it might be 20 if you're working in a really, desert market, then start talking to them. Just speak to the guys. Like, people are so receptive, and especially when you're speaking about their jobs.
Yeah,
And it's why we're so lucky. We've got a team who just genuinely love just speaking to people and learning about people's jobs. And that's all we need to do. We need to collect enough information to make an educated decision. And in a market, and not just a market, in an economy and a world that moves so fast, a lot of people still assume that they know things from 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We don't. If 3 months and our information is out of date because
yeah,
someone might have moved away, someone might have had COVID, someone might have had a situational change in their family. You just don't know what changes. Someone's company might have gone bust overnight. So no information is ever live, and I think you have to track your conversations with these people. And this is where I'm always happy to give this away, because ultimately it does take time. And someone who there's 10 people could do what we do, and I really genuinely believe that we come out on top every time because of how much attention we pay to what we do. And that's the answer in the campaigns. You pay attention to what they say. So at the end of that part of the campaign, you have a spreadsheet with 50 or 100 people that have your skill set, as well as a good idea of what these people are saying about what their move motivators are, why do they stay at their company, what would they look for, why did their friend interview with that company, who's moving over there, who's starting a new division. And you get all of this, like, within days. You can have such an amazing picture of this whole market to then start with those exact same names, by the way, non-invasively, just marketing back exactly what they've said. So we've worked with businesses, by the way, we don't just make things up and say that we've magically fixed these things. We've done market studies, and then we'll work with the directors to just make small tweaks. And okay, like, these people don't like it when they have to pay for their own PPE, or they think that the bonus structure is better over there. Sometimes it's actually not, and a lot of it's hearsay. So we also do things like newsletters, by the way. So we'll do internal bulletins, and we'll work with companies to communicate with their own staff. We'll hear things happening on site, and such is paying more money, such and such has got a bonus out. So we just educate people, and we'll talk them through the different pay brackets across the industry and why theirs is different, etc. But ultimately, once we collected enough information, we can campaign anything back to people, and we make the fixes in businesses. And then we go and tell those people, hey, here's a company that fixes those problems you said you had. And the chances are we'll get an application from them, because all of this is so fresh on their mind. Often they don't necessarily know that it's linked back from the conversation, obviously. So it just turns out that it's just a really good, honest marketing campaign.
yeah. That is really interesting. And again, it goes back to what you were saying earlier about pain points from the point of view of clients. Candidates have those as well. Yeah, and I've always said that it's, if someone joins a company and it doesn't work out, then it could be, as you say, a very small thing. It might just be a mismatch in the culture. Maybe the accepted practice is people stay in the office till 6:30. And if you've got responsibilities, which means you have to leave at 5:30, then that could be an issue, because culturally everyone else sort of stays on later. Now, maybe that's not a typical example, but there are things where I think candidates in the interview process, again, and I always say it's a two-way thing. So you're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you, and you really need to be sure that it's going to be the right place for you before you agree to join. Because there is an element sometimes, I think, of, and I probably did this when I was younger, of that'll be fine. I'm sure it'll be fine once I'm there, but that can be a mistake, but it's also candidates, I think they feel there's a bit of a power imbalance in an interview. But if you recognize that you're interviewing them as well, I think it sort of levels up that balance of power. But it also leads to a more honest and open interview. And at the end of that, if it's a hiring decision and they offer you and you accept, then it's probably a better match than it would have been had you not gone through that process.
It's something that's really difficult for people to get their heads around, particularly when the market 1 minute candidate is king, and business is at the mercy of every candidate, because they can't find the skill set anywhere. And then next we have something like Right Now, where the candidates are supposed to be very grateful and employers are now the ones with the opportunity. So it's often, I think it's difficult when you don't have the luxury of perspective, and sometimes being made redundant or needing to pay the bills next month can really cloud that and put you in a position of lesser power and I need this and thank you. So it's a really difficult thing to maintain, and I think sometimes that, I guess if we call it desperation for lack of a better word, sometimes that can be the number one cause, I think, of mismatches and people unhappy in jobs, because everyone has great guides from their recruiters of what to say and how to get the interview to go well based on feedback of other people that got it or didn't get it. And then when they get in there, those first 3 months, you could probably put up a brave face and pretend that this is you and you need it and you want it. And then particularly, as soon as you start feeling in some cases, some like financial cushion maybe, then all of a sudden, the job doesn't satisfy it so much anymore because the basic needs have been met. So I think having sometimes as a wide market that does go up and down so much. So I think that's a really difficult thing to try and maintain, although of course that should be right. The skill set and the person with the skill set and contributing to a business should be just as much valued as the paycheck on the other side. So it's just difficult to maintain, but of course, as recruiters, we should all be backing that and making sure our candidates feel empowered, whether or not we're working directly for the company or as agency recruiters. I think that's a responsibility for a good candidate service.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really good. Well, look, I think we're up to nearly an hour. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I hope any candidates out there who are in your market will come to you, and also companies, because I think, you clearly know your market, and I think in terms of what you said about candidates and the way they should prepare and giving them that edge, that we know that candidates coming from recruitment agencies generally are better briefed and more prepared, because I guess as the recruitment consultant, recruitment company, you've got more sort of invested in it, really. But yeah, I would like to thank you very much for your time, Ben. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I'm sure there's loads of learning that both companies and candidates can take from this. So I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure.